All right, welcome back. Sebastian here. So, time for my review of Aston Martin's 2024 F1 season. I don't think you can really sugarcoat this anyway. It wasn't a good season, I think, especially considering the circumstances coming into the season, especially as well the expectations after a very strong, or at least a very strong half season in 2023, where Alonso got bunch of podiums, finished fourth in the Drivers' Championship, and again was racing cars at the front for a big chunk of that season. So I think 2024 was a big disappointment for Aston Martin. Stroll, Alonso was still his very strong self. Stroll, not so much. Definitely a pretty weak season, even by Stroll's low standards. But let's get into this. So first, taking a look at their driver head-to-head. I'm looking at their two drivers, seeing if we can get this. Oh dear, I got this wrong. Let's see, there we go. So, Alonso, Stroll, qualifying head-to-head, not particularly close, but a little bit closer than last year. We'll get into that in a bit. But Alonso won the qualifying head-to-head 19-5, with a median qualifying gap of 0.287 seconds in Alonso's favor. When you look at average starting position, finishing position, for Alonso, he had a pretty decisive edge there, about 3 positions edge for both starting position and finishing position. So for Alonso, 9.5, whereas for Stroll, 12.78. When you look at average finishing position for Alonso, 9.83, and for Stroll, 12.30. And again, one interesting tidbit as well is that for Alonso, he actually went backwards in the races compared to where he qualified, which again is pretty rare for Alonso, given that we know how strong he is in races, especially compared to his qualifying form. Not saying that he's a bad qualifier, but again, between his age and the fact that just historically speaking, he's known for being a better Sunday driver than a Saturday driver. Definitely, I think shows as well that Aston Martin definitely didn't have a particularly strong car on Sundays. Now, for Alonso, finished 9th in the championship, 70 points, and for Stroll, 13th in the championship, 24 points. So again, pretty big chasm between the two drivers in points. Alonso scoring almost triple Stroll's points, which again is pretty close to what it was last year. So again, not particularly close in either qualifying or the race. When you look at race head-to-head, not close either, 14-5 in Stroll in Alonso's favor. Now, a bit of a surprise, when you look at the expected points model, it suggests that neither driver was getting the most out of the car. So again, for expected points, 100 is kind of average, and you want to be over 100. For Alonso, he was negative 6.94, or 91%. And for Stroll, negative 11.59 or 67%. Now, again, being in the 90% range for this stat is not terrible, but it's not great either. And if you look at Alonso's kind of season by season numbers for this stat, he's traditionally always been, well above 100, especially when he's been in midfield cars, just because it is a little bit easier to be above 100 in a midfield car compared to being in a front-running car. So again, a little bit surprising. Again, some of that might be just the characteristics of the car. My model, the new version of my model, takes into account, the difference between, how it does on Saturday and how it does on Sunday as well, to kind of recalibrate things a little bit. But again, I do think a little bit is going to be Alonso's age kind of starting to catch up with him. And for Stroll, again, can't really defend it. It was a pretty bad season, both in qualifying and in the races. When you look at my average on my power rankings, again, pretty big difference between the two of them. For Alonso, 9.52 was his average, which I believe ranks 9th or 10th. For the other drivers, I had it up, but not for these ones for whatever reason. And for Stroll, 15.00, which I know ranks 20th, and he was only ahead of Zhou and Sargent, so pretty bad for Stroll. And again, if you look at all the drivers who are around Stroll, for this average on my power rankings, all of them are being replaced for next year except for Stroll. So, and Paris, again, still unknown at this point, but again, it kind of shows that, Stroll, if he was any other driver, if he wasn't the son of the boss of Aston Martin, he probably would have been fired years ago. So again, definitely frustrating, even as someone who generally likes Stroll, supports Stroll as a Canadian. It's frustrating to see a guy who's basically taking up a seat where, it could have been Drugovich, it could have been, a whole handful of other drivers who unfortunately will never get that, realistically will never get that chance in Formula One. Now, when you look at the difference between this year and last year in terms of comparing head-to-head between Stroll and Alonso, it's actually pretty consistent between both race and qualifying. And again, data shows from 2023 to 2024, a little bit of improvement from Stroll's side. So again, the gap between Alonso and Stroll a little bit closer than 2024. Now, some of that could be Alonso getting a little bit older. Some of it could be Stroll actually having winter testing, not having his wrists broken before the season started. So again, I think that definitely hurt him a little bit at the start of last season. So again, it could be a little bit of both, and it could also just be a little bit of random luck as well. It could also be, Alonso just being a little bit less motivated, given that the car is a bit less competitive. So, there's all kinds of reasons why the gap could have gone down. But interestingly enough, I think for both the race model and the qualifying model, the numbers are honestly not that far off between where Perez and Stroll were in 2019, 2020. So again, kind of suggests, of course, that was, the good Perez when he was still performing very, very well. But again, it to me suggests that at this point, Alonso's not really a top level driver, but he's still, a very, very good driver and still one of the best drivers in the midfield. Now, when we look at Aston Martin's stats, they were basically in no man's land by themselves for the whole season. In fifth in the Constructors' Championship, 94 points. They were basically marooned there from the early races, and they had basically no competition from teams behind them just because there were too many teams that were fighting each other for those spots. When you look at average pole gap, 0.939 seconds, which ranks fifth. Again, they were well clear of the team in sixth, which was Haas, and they were miles off the team in fourth. When you look at average minimum finishing position, 8.33, which ranks fifth. That's, I believe, about 4 positions lower than Mercedes, and again, a little bit better than Haas, who ranked fifth. When you look at pole gap across the season, this is going to be one of the more disappointing results. So if you look over at the far left where Bahrain is, Mercedes actually were really competitive with both McLaren and Mercedes over one lap to start the season. And then you can see basically it's just a gradual getting worse over the season as the season progresses. And basically by about Miami, which is about where the first upgrades were, you can see they basically went from being at least competitive with Mercedes to basically being dead in the midfield and really being stuck in that midfield. And I think even more troublingly, the last 5 or 6 races for Aston Martin, they basically were one of the slowest teams over one lap over the entire field. So they're actually slower than Sauber the last 3 races for, the 3-race rolling average, and they were competitive with a Williams that was basically stuck together with hopes and dreams. So again, not looking good in terms of development cycle for Aston Martin, and it was something that was an issue with the team last year in 2023. So I think, realistically for most people, they're not going to be super optimistic about Aston Martin's chances for 2024. If I had to make a super early prediction for a Constructors' Championship for next year, I'd probably put Aston Martin like 8th or 9th right now. So again, not looking good. And again, I think they have a lot to work to do to understand, why the upgrades they bring to their car are simply not working. When you look at the race data, again, not good, not particularly good either. Just completely downhill quarter after quarter. So when you look at points, that's the red line. First quarter of the season, they got about 40 points. Second quarter, they got about 25. Third quarter, about 15. And last quarter, they got less than 10. So really, really troubling stuff there for the points. The average finishing position is a bit less linear, but still not great. First quarter, they were finishing about 10th. On average, second quarter, they're finishing about 12th. Third quarter, a little bit better, finishing about 11th or so. And then final quarter, again, not great, a little bit better than 12th. So again, quarter by quarter, but for both qualifying results and for race results, regression throughout the course of the season for Aston Martin. And again, when you look at the year-by-year results, it's pretty crazy. They can basically swing from great to terrible, with seemingly no in between. So 2020, of course, the infamous tracing point year, the pink Mercedes, qualifying pace, race pace, very, very strong, basically somewhere between low front running car or very, very elite midfield car. And then 2021, massive step backwards to basically being a low midfield car. 2022, again, low midfield car, and qualifying pace that year was absolutely atrocious. You can see the gap between the blue line and the red line is absolutely massive that year. Qualifying, they were like just nowhere. And then in 2023, of course, with a car concept that was very, very similar to the Red Bull. And of course, with Alonso joining the team that year, massive improvement. And over the course of the full season, they were a little bit slower, according to, average minimum starting position, finishing position compared to the Racing Point, but still very, very good car and a massive improvement from the year before. That being said, unfortunately, 2024, over the course of the season, they basically went backwards. And when you look at the season as a whole, as an average, it turns out to be a little bit better than 2021 and 2022, but still compared to where they were, a stable set of regulations, no, floor changes like there were in 2021, which obviously hurt them. So again, there aren't really any identifiable, technical directives or reasons to explain why they dropped off in pace so much. So again, it will be interesting to see what the team does in 2025. I'm not super optimistic. I'm sure if you're an Alonso fan, you want him to do well. You want you need to somehow show up, even though he doesn't start till March. And change things right away, and they can be back at the front again like they were for the first half of 2023. But I think realistically, they're probably going to be at best be in the midfield fight, scrapping away again like they were for most of this season. And I think really for this set of regulations, it's kind of a lost cause. I think, there's only one more season left. Best case scenario, I think, for the team, like many of the other teams in the midfield, is fifth. I think the gap to the top four is simply too big at this point to turn over in one off season. And for the team, they're going to really want to try to focus on 2026, understand why many of the upgrades they brought the last 2 years don't work. And of course, 2026 are going to be the Honda Works team. So again, there'll be a Works team. I do think that's a pretty important step for the team. We saw with Red Bull when they first basically brought on Honda in 2019, how while there were some difficulties at the start, the outright ceiling for what that car could do was much higher than it had been previously under Renault. So again, it'll be interesting to see if a similar situation happens. Another thing that I've seen online is that because Aston Martin used the same rear suspension and gearbox as the Mercedes, that a lot of the circuits where Mercedes tend to do very, very well, Aston Martin also do very well. And of course, Mercedes have struggled quite a bit the last couple years or so. So again, if if Mercedes have a really strong 2025, maybe Aston Martin will also have a 2025. But again, it'll be interesting to see how things go for the Silverstone team in 2025. So again, thank you so much for watching. That is my review of Aston Martin's 2024 season. I'll be back next up with the first of the top four teams. And of course, that is fourth in the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes. Anyway, that's all for today. Goodbye.